They say some structures do not merely occupy a landscape, but actively absorb the sorrow spilled upon their floors. When blood and grief seep into the foundation over decades, a building can become a terrifying archive of human suffering. Standing on a lonely hill in Junee, New South Wales, is a Victorian manor that embodies this dark phenomenon. It is widely considered the most haunted house in Australia. The Monte Cristo Homestead was born of ambition and immense wealth. Constructed in 1884 by Christopher William Crawley, a prosperous pioneer, the estate was designed to project power and aristocratic elegance over the surrounding rural township. The Crawley family enjoyed a life of privilege, hosting lavish balls and wielding immense social influence. Yet, beneath the veneer of colonial success, a shadow was quietly gathering over the sprawling property. From its wrought iron balconies to its imposing brick facade, the architecture itself seems to loom with a quiet, watchful malice. The manor features deep, cavernous hallways and steep staircases that echo with the slightest footfall. In the late 19th century, it was a bustling epicenter of domestic labor and high society. Today, those same halls are suffocated by an unnatural stillness, broken only by the weight of undocumented history. The first documented historical tragedy to strike the estate involved a young maid whose life ended with brutal suddenness. Tasked with cleaning the upper levels, she plummeted from the second-story balcony, her body striking the unforgiving ground below. The official record ruled it a tragic accident, a fatal slip while polishing the balustrade. However, whispered rumors among the staff suggested a darker narrative, hinting at an intentional push. The echoes of that fatal fall never truly dissipated from the property. Visitors standing on that very balcony have reported an overwhelming sensation of vertigo, accompanied by the distinct, terrifying feeling of unseen hands pressing firmly against their backs. Below, on the steps where she perished, a spectral stain is said to occasionally manifest. The air in this specific corridor often drops to a freezing, unnatural temperature. A single accidental death might leave a lingering melancholy, but it rarely cements a reputation for absolute terror. The phenomenon of the cursed house requires a relentless accumulation of grief, where one disaster magnetically attracts another. At this isolated estate, the maid's demise was merely the opening chapter in a cascading sequence of horrors. The soil itself seemed to sour, demanding a continuous toll from those who resided there. The darkness soon claimed a young stable boy, an impoverished youth employed to tend the family's horses. Late one evening, a fire ignited in the small, cramped quarters where he slept. The flames consumed the timber structure with terrifying speed, trapping the boy inside. He burned to death in his bed, his desperate screams ignored or unheard by the wealthy inhabitants sleeping soundly in the main manor. That agonizing death left a permanent psychological scar on the grounds. Those walking near the old coach house at night frequently report the sudden, acrid scent of burning timber and scorched flesh. More chilling are the auditory anomalies. In the dead of night, the horrifying sounds of a young man screaming in agony have been heard echoing across the property, only to abruptly cease, leaving a suffocating silence. The compounding weight of these horrific accidents began to exact a heavy toll on the matriarch of the house, Elizabeth Crawley. Following the unexpected passing of her husband in 1910, her grief twisted into a severe, reclusive paranoia. The once vibrant hostess locked herself away in the upper levels of the manor. The sprawling estate, built to showcase immense social triumph, had transformed into her personal, isolated fortress. For the remaining 23 years of her life, Elizabeth reportedly left the house on only 2 occasions. She shrouded herself in black mourning attire, converting the opulent residence into a dark, silent mausoleum dedicated to her lost husband. She ruled the remaining staff with an iron fist, her bitter sorrow permeating every room. The psychological atmosphere of the home shifted from colonial grandeur to suffocating, inescapable despair. Her imposing presence refuses to vacate the master bedroom. Witnesses have documented an oppressive, icy weight settling over their chests when entering her former private quarters. Some claim to see a woman in a high-collared black dress staring coldly from the shadows, her face twisted in eternal disapproval. Silver crosses and personal items left in the room are frequently found violently thrown across the floor by unseen forces. Life in 19th century Australia was undeniably harsh, and the frontier was notoriously unforgiving. Mortality rates were high, and domestic accidents were a common reality for the working class. Yet, statistical probability fails to explain the sheer concentration of fatal incidents localized entirely within the boundaries of this single property. The estate became a focal point for misery, drawing tragedy toward it like a twisted subterranean magnet. The most heartbreaking incident involved a completely innocent member of the household. A nursemaid, entrusted with the care of the Crawley family's infant daughter, was carrying the child down the steep wooden central staircase. According to her frantic testimony, an invisible force violently shoved her, tearing the infant from her arms. The baby tumbled down the stairs, suffering fatal head injuries upon impacting the hard floor below. The nursemaid's claims of an unseen assailant were dismissed as hysterical attempts to avoid blame for a clumsy accident. Yet, the auditory remnants of that tragedy linger in the empty Victorian hallways. Visitors frequently report the phantom sounds of a baby crying softly in the dark, accompanied by the frantic, echoing footsteps of a woman running down the stairs. The sorrow here is trapped in an endless loop. Even after the original family line faded and the property changed hands, the curse seemed to demand fresh victims. The house sat abandoned for decades, falling into severe disrepair before a caretaker was hired in the early 1960s to watch over the crumbling ruins. His tenure ended in horrific bloodshed. He was brutally murdered in his small cottage on the grounds, shot by a young man obsessed with a violent film. Following the murder, the homestead was left to rot, its grand architecture surrendered to the elements and vandals. The wind howled through shattered windows, and the once immaculate gardens became a tangled, overgrown wilderness. It was during this period of absolute desolation that local legends truly took root. The abandoned structure on the hill became a looming monument to death, a place where the town's darkest fears were projected. When new owners finally purchased the ruin in 1963 with intentions of restoring its former glory, they did not just buy a piece of real estate. They inherited a century of concentrated trauma. As they painstakingly repaired the plaster and polished the floorboards, they quickly realized they were not alone. The restoration process seemed to awaken the dormant energy, stirring the forgotten residents from their restless slumber. The current inhabitants have endured decades of persistent, inexplicable activity. Heavy antique furniture is routinely dragged across the floorboards in empty rooms above them. Disembodied voices whisper aggressively in the dark corridors, and physical sensations of being grabbed or scratched are terrifyingly common. The haunting is not a subtle, fleeting shadow. It is an aggressive physical assertion of presence by those who died violently on the property. Parapsychologists and dark historians often point to the stone tape theory to explain such relentless activity. This hypothesis suggests that extreme emotional trauma, such as terror, agony, and profound grief, can physically imprint upon the environment. The iron, stone, and timber of the house act as a recording device, capturing the traumatic energy of the past. Under this theory, the estate is endlessly broadcasting its worst moments into the present. Perhaps the most disturbing imprint belongs to a man named Harold. He was the son of a housekeeper, born with severe mental disabilities. In an era that fundamentally misunderstood psychological conditions, he was hidden away from society. For over 30 years, Harold was chained to a wall in the coach house, living in squalor and darkness, treated more like a dangerous animal than a human being. Harold's miserable existence ended shortly after he was discovered by authorities and removed from the property, but his agony remains tethered to the outbuilding. The atmosphere inside the coach house is notoriously suffocating, often inducing sudden panic attacks in those who enter. The distinct metallic clinking of heavy iron chains dragging across the cobblestone floor is frequently heard, a phantom echo of a life spent in total subjugation. When examining why the Monte Cristo Homestead remains so profoundly active, one must look at this staggering accumulation of despair. It is not merely the ghost of one fallen maid, or a burned stable boy, or a grieving widow, or an abused outcast. It is the terrifying convergence of all these tragedies in one localized space. The house has become an overcrowded purgatory of marginalized, forgotten, and traumatized souls. To walk through its meticulously restored rooms today is to experience a profound sense of temporal displacement. The antique furnishings and Victorian wallpaper offer a beautiful facade, but the underlying dread is inescapable. There is a palpable heaviness in the air, a predatory stillness that makes visitors instinctively check over their shoulders. The building does not feel like a museum. It feels like a trap that is not yet sprung. The legacy of the Crawley family's grand ambition has been completely eclipsed by the macabre reality of their estate. They built a monument to their own success, but inadvertently constructed a vessel for unending misery. The history of this place is a grim reminder that wealth and status offer no protection against the arbitrary cruelty of fate, nor do they shield the living from the consequences of the dead. Some mysteries are not meant to be solved, only survived. The relentless haunting of this Australian manor is a testament to the enduring power of cumulative tragedy. The sorrow spilled here was too immense to simply wash away with time. The Monte Cristo Homestead remains haunted because the land itself is deeply scarred, and the walls refuse to let the dead sleep in peace.